I'd just like to take the opportunity and wish everyone a happy new year as we move from 2025 into 2026 and highlight that some of the challenges that we faced in this year and the years before will not easily be shifted. And today I'm talking about a case of two children who died in Australia. And the question was whether or not it was connected to COVID vaccines. And I'll play you a clip from the session that happened in the Australian Senate when they were talking to one of the leads of the TGA. And I'll then dig deep into how in the world did this situation happen, not just in Australia, but all over the world. You keep on hearing that there is no evidence or there is no link in terms of causality between adverse effects of COVID vaccines and patients who died. The same issue is coming up in the United States. 96 children died. It's unclear how many of them were clearly associated with the vaccine. I'm going to tell you today why that is almost impossible, and it is such a difficult task to cover. In the process, I'll be sharing with you the journey that the WHO took in terms of looking at the assessment of causality of individual adverse events following immunization. This paper was from 2012. And what you will realize is that the COVID pandemic dovetailed into a situation that was unprecedented. In truth, there are many people who will listen to this conversation, hear the angle that I'm going from, and they will think, oh no, somebody else targeting the COVID vaccines. In time, you will realize I'm actually protecting industry, public health, and the reputation of medicine. Because if somebody doesn't ask the questions and the brown stuff hits the fan, everybody lands up in it. Nobody benefits. Additionally, for those who don't quite understand where I stand in this process, look at this. We have just published our paper on long COVID pathophysiology. And listen, this is our team, small team with Professor Turner and Professor Uhal. We are here trying to identify and pattern all of the characteristics around long COVID. This has never been attempted before. And so we'd be happy if you read it. And in time, I'll be able to show you just how different phenotypes can be identified in the context of that. So it's just highlighting that we are right at the forefront of the research. So when we're asking questions and raising concerns, it should not be taken lightly. So let's look at the first stage with regards to what happened in terms of this discussion. If you can't hear it, please let me know. Hopefully you can hear the sound. Let's listen to what happened in this discussion. This was in Australia. It's about a minute and a half long.
Professor Skerritt, when did it first come to the attention of the TGA that two Australian children, one aged 7 and one aged 9 years of age, died of cardiac arrests directly after receiving a COVID vaccination?
So, Senator, we have a number of reports of deaths of people of all ages, including children, temporally related to adverse events from vaccination, or not related to adverse events from vaccination, just related in time. So these these two reports were received in our database of adverse event notifications. Unfortunately, we were unable to get sufficient information on these particular cases to assess them in detail, but they were associated, the information we did have is that they were associated with heart attack, which is not a known adverse event of any of the COVID vaccines.
I'm sorry, did you just say that cardiac arrest is not an associated
adverse event
as an event? Myocarditis, which leads to heart attacks, is. You do have in front of you two notes for file which relate to both of the incidents which have been obtained on Freedom of Information both of which I think do draw a conclusion that they were as a result of the COVID vaccination.
No, that is incorrect, Senator. If they are as a result of vaccination, we would have put an announcement. They were not concluded to be associated with vaccination.
So these were just a 7 and a 9-year-old who just died of... How often do 7 and 9-year-olds die of cardiac arrest?
Unfortunately, it's not as uncommon as you think.
Really?
So, yes.
So that was a conversation. I'm going to come back to it because, well, now that you've heard it, we now need to review it when I've shown you what really is going on here. And as I said, if you're just joining, that was a discourse between Senator, I think, Anik in Australia, speaking with Professor Skerritt, who was one of the leads in the TGA, which is looking at vaccine safety, and the challenge about 2 children who died temporarily related to the vaccination. They've said cardiac arrest, which can occur in children, but it is exceptionally rare. So this is where we come now to a transition that occurred, perfectly dovetailed into the COVID pandemic and creates quite a problem moving forward. So let's look at what happened. So when it comes to vaccine safety, there has always been a concern that they didn't want the credibility of vaccines to be damaged because of inappropriate associations with adverse events. Okay, that was where it came from. So in about 2012, they were looking, and this is here, public health programs are faced with great challenges to establish if the events presenting after the administration of a vaccine are due to other conditions and hence a coincidental presentation rather than caused by the administered vaccines. So this was about 2013 that this paper was published. And so it's highlighting that the Global Advisory Committee for Vaccine Safety was commissioned to review previous adverse event following immunization, causality assessment and methodology, okay? So they were trying to reassess this from about 2012, 2013. And this paper is focused on the changes that they made to the algorithm. And just a few other points here is that assessments of adverse events following immunization should be part of routine pharmacovigilance practice. And essentially, any untoward medical occurrence which follows immunization and which does not necessarily have a causal relationship with the usage of the vaccine. So their main problem was that you may have had, if you imagine somebody gets vaccinated and they die from something else, and the natural association is to think it was because of the vaccine. This then damages the trust of vaccines generally in the eyes of the public. And so what they are trying to do is head off some of that hesitancy and try and say, unless we have very clear associations with vaccination, we will not link causality. Okay, that's the starting point. Now, this plan was discussed and agreed in about 2012, 2013, and became much more formalized around 2019. I think this was before the pandemic. But because it was formalized in that way, it naturally extends into the pandemic period. And this is the document that literally almost every country would then use in terms of managing adverse effects. Causality. This is from the World Health Organization. And again, it's serving as a guide, a systematic standardized process for assessing whether or not serious adverse effects following immunizations are causally linked to vaccines or not. So this is what they're trying to see if they can work out. Who should assess it? What levels they consider relevant? Considerations for assessing causality. And then they have a flow chart to help them to realistically and objectively link this kind of event, because they're trying to standardize it all across the world. because they were finding that different regions were applying a cause to vaccine differently. And so their hope was that this would be standardized. So here is how it works out. This is how our case is classified at the end of the assessment. Consistent with causal association to immunization. It could be vaccine product related, quality related, immunization error, or anxiety immunization. Indeterminate. There is consistent temporal relationships. So that means that the time frame between vaccination and the event are close. It's consistent, but insufficient definitive evidence for the vaccine causing the event. Or when you review the factors, there are conflicting trends in consistency and inconsistency in order to get cause to immunization. That's indeterminate. And then you have inconsistent causal association, that something else was going on and the person died. And then finally, you have case without adequate information, unclassifiable. Now, if you had listened to the previous link where they said they didn't have the information, those two children would have fallen into the category of unclassifiable because they didn't have available information to make any clear associations. Now, this is where it gets very, very complicated, because in effect, when you look very carefully at this document, it needs very clear the death. Okay, follow along here. In the past, if someone died in relation to a vaccine, temporarily related to being vaccinated, say they were vaccinated, they had no other comorbidities, they were given a vaccine, they felt unwell, and then 3 days later they die. The prior association would be that if we can find no other cause, the likelihood would be vaccination. But when they brought in this change in terms of the new classification, what it means is that that would no longer, that would be indeterminate. If you did not find a very clear pathological association or prior trend to explain this link. And so suddenly the bar has been lifted very, very high. Okay, so look at it carefully again. When they do it here, consideration, temporal relationship. Is it certain that the vaccination predicted the event? Yes. Alternative explanations. Was there some other event that occurred around it that could have contributed? Proof of association. Is there clinical or laboratory proof that the vaccine caused the event? Prior evidence. So if it has been previously agreed and this pattern has been shown, say for instance myocarditis, that can be accepted. Does there have population-based evidence, the rate of occurrence exceeded, and biological plausibility? All of these are relevant, but I want you to take notice of something here. Proof of association. Is there clinical or lab proof that the vaccine caused the event? Here is the problem. You can only know that in the context of autopsy. And I don't mean external autopsy. I mean detailed histological examination of tissue to try and figure out whether or not there is causality. The problem is that nobody is doing autopsies. They take time. They take resource from pathologists. And it's inconvenient if you find unusual patterns. Remember, the Japanese recently found a new condition, multiple microscars, never been seen before in the heart of people who had been boosted. It was a small study. Is anybody else looking for it? No, nobody wants to know. And so this is where we now hit a very important problem, just so that you understand how this works. people die, it's temporarily associated with vaccination. We hear this all the time. Similarly, like for instance, the CDC, the 96 children, 96 had a temporal association with vaccination. It doesn't mean all of them died because of it. But here is the problem. What you then need is clear laboratory evidence that this was the association. But if autopsies are not done, or there are only limited autopsies, it means no pathology is found. If there is no pathology found, it means, say, there is no evidence of myocarditis in the case of the young children. If there is no evidence of myocarditis because there is no pathology, because no autopsy was done, then you can't link vaccines as a causation, because there is no evidence of myocarditis, because no pathology was found and no autopsy was done. Therefore, there is no cause for concern. And you do it over and over again. The problem with this is that they will be missing critical signals. Now, prior to COVID-19, you could argue that you're using tried and tested vaccines that have been used all the time for the past 20 or 30 years, and you're standardizing practice. Then, in 2021 or late 2020, you have a pandemic. You have a novel virus for which very few people understand how it kills people. But great, we will come up with a vaccine. Not only do you develop a vaccine, but you develop it using novel platforms. So it's not the usual tried and tested, live attenuated. In some cases, the Chinese did try that, but it was either adenovirus platforms or mRNA platforms. So you're using novel platforms against a novel virus in a pandemic. Should you have the responsibility or the foresight to actually bring back the bar with regards to association, to make sure you are not missing signals that would be relevant? That's the question. Now, I'm just telling anybody who is listening here, because I know most of the people making these decisions don't understand the disease. I told you before, it's not the virus that is killing people in severe COVID. It was the immune response to the virus. And it wasn't just any part of the virus that triggered this immune dysregulation. It was a specific part of the virus. It just so happened that coincidentally, the same part of the virus that seems to trigger very abnormal cytokine storms is the same part of the virus they use to prime the immune system. The virus, guess what, is still circulating. It's continuing to change. It's becoming more and more infectious. It's not triggering the immune system any longer. The immune system of the population is now immune suppressed with IgG4 antibodies, so they're tolerating viral infection. You now have no idea where we are. This is the situation we are now. And they are using templates from 2012 that are, in my view, no longer relevant. That's the problem. Listen again, and this time, when I play this this video,
Professor Skerritt,
I'm going to interrupt it so that I explain to you clearly what is happening. So remember, they changed the bar. It now ends up in a pandemic where you have less understanding of what's going on, and they didn't bring the bar back down, and nobody's doing autopsies. So here is what then happens in this situation. Follow along.
Professor Skerritt, when did it first come to the attention of the TGA that two Australian children, one aged 7 and one aged 9 years of age, died of cardiac arrests directly after receiving a COVID vaccination?
Pause there. Directly after receiving COVID vaccination. In the old rules, if there was no other cause found, that would have been triggering a signal. In the new system, that's not enough. But here why it still doesn't trigger a signal. Follow along.
So, Senator, we have a number of reports of deaths of people of all ages, including children, temporally related to adverse events from vaccination, or not related to adverse events from vaccination, just related in time. So these these two reports were received in our database of adverse event notifications. Unfortunately, we were unable to get sufficient information on these particular cases to assess them in detail.
Pause there. Remember, I said, without the lab evidence, so without the whole picture, they can't link causality. So that means that, in theory, they are unclassifiable. Therefore, there's no signal. And that signal, therefore, doesn't translate into looking for any other problems. That's how serious this becomes. Let's go back.
But they were associated, the information we did have is that they were associated with heart attack, which is not a known adverse event of any of the COVID vaccines.
Pausing here again. Now, as I said, a heart attack. Now, you need to be very specific in this case, because a heart attack, are you suggesting that these 7 and 9-year-old children had a blocked artery in their heart with damage to the myocardium, which then caused their heart to fail and them going to arrest? If that's what you're talking about, that is exceptionally unusual in children. Not that it can't happen. Very unusual. If, however, any of those children didn't have any obvious pathology to explain the cause of death, it would suggest that it was an arrhythmia. And so unless they had genetic predispositions for arrhythmias or some other trigger, why would it not be considered associated? Let's continue.
I'm sorry, did you just say that cardiac arrest is not an associated
adverse event
as event? Myocarditis, which leads to heart attacks, is. You do have in front of you two notes for file which relate.
Pausing you there again, because what he mentioned was a very important point. What he said is that heart attacks, we would agree that we haven't really seen that many heart attacks in children happening in relation to vaccination, but what we have seen is myocarditis, and that has a flag and a signal. So the question would be, did any of these children after vaccination have myocarditis with an associated arrhythmia, which was the cause of death? If they haven't done detailed histopathological examination looking for myocarditis signals in the heart, you'd never be able to see it. And therefore, it would be unclassifiable. That's where it goes into a loop. But let's continue to the end.
To both of the incidents which have been obtained on freedom of information, both of which I think do draw a conclusion that they were as a result of the COVID vaccination.
No, that is incorrect, Senator. If they were as a result of vaccination, we would have put an announcement. They were not concluded to be associated with vaccination.
So these were just a 7 and a 9-year-old who just died of... How often do 7 and 9-year-olds die of cardiac arrests?
Unfortunately, it's not as uncommon as you think.
Really?
So, yes.
So as I said, now he said something very important there. He said they were not considered associated because if it was, there would have been an announcement. And so you see the loop happening over and over again. Follow along.
Professor Skerritt, when did it first come to the attention of the TGA?
let's just see, as I said, follow along in order to understand how this works. So in this case, you had a situation where child died, a limited or external autopsy without the detailed looking for myocarditis was done, and so no pathology was found. No pathology was found, and there was no evidence of myocarditis. Therefore, if there was no evidence of myocarditis, you cannot link it to the vaccine. Therefore, there is no cause for concern. Another child, the same thing. No cause for concern. No need to flag it. And so this is the cycle that we keep on going through. So here's my final thought. As I say, some people don't like me talking about these things. They believe that this fuels misinformation. There is absolutely nothing I have said here that is not factual. 2, just imagine that these signals are relevant. For one, they're not going to disappear. They will just present later. And I will warn anyone in industry and even in public health, if you let it reach a stage where it is so obvious that you cannot deny it, there is no way back for a generation. People will not listen anymore. We are already getting close to that point. It is not in the interest of the public to lose complete faith in the scientific community. We are better off getting rid of people who are untrustworthy, not honest, and are damaging the credibility of science and health. That's where we are now. And as I said, industry, it may appear as if you have gotten away with things, but based on the science, this is likely to come back to bite you. It is not worth it. I would advise you to start looking, and if you then find these signals and address them, it will be far better for industry. And this is especially important to the parts of industry that are not directly receiving benefit from the whole COVID pandemic. So there are lots of pharma companies that are producing drugs, producing things that are helping people. You will be banded in the same category as those who chose to be silent because the financial rewards or the liability risks were too high. Therefore, if you choose to do that, going into 2026, I will be happy to say you will deserve the outcomes that will follow. And I would not be trying in any way to release or mitigate them, because truthfully, at this point, anyone who is not seeking answers is part of the problem. And in 2026, we're not going to put up with it. Let's see if we can push the new year forward, bring science to the fore, bring back accountability, and make everyone better for the future. Have a great new year. Let's try and work together.
A hero, an immune adventure. Humming Heroes, your lyrical guide to the body's defenders. Now on Amazon. Check the links below.